Hello, good morning. Welcome back to the League of Extraordinary Atheists for Humanism, where we attempt to apply logic and reason to religion and politics. And I'm here with a very special guest, Kelly of Topic Thunder.
Little dog. Hello, everyone. Hello.
Awesome. I'm very excited to have you here today. So how is it going over there in late morning?
Well, it's lovely. It's just gone below zero, 1 degree above zero. So a little bit chilly, but yeah, nothing compared to what Notch is going through in his lovely country, and certainly not as cold as Canadians have it. So I can't complain.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would complain a little more if it was just above zero here.
It is winter, so we sort of expect it, but we still moan about it. You know?
Yeah.
The weather's a big topic.
Yeah. I haven't checked how cold it is over here today yet. It's 30 degrees here, so it could be worse. It's just below freezing. Just below. So, all right. Well, today we're going to be talking about cancel culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I looked into the ContraPoints dealio just a little bit yesterday. Mm-hmm. Seems pretty straightforward what's going on. Mm-hmm. And is that kind of the jump off point that you'd like to
well, yeah. I think we got the idea to do this particular podcast sort of informed a little bit by the video I did a few weeks ago, didn't we? We sort of wanted to talk more about it, and just based on cancel culture and legends and things like that, and how we hold them up to such sort of high esteem. And although the ContraPoint story in the land of the internet happened, sort of about a month or so ago, so 8,000 years in internet time, it's something that's been the most poignant in my mind of recent memory in terms of the power of cancel culture and the utmost silliness of it all. And perhaps because I am a fan of hers, it's sort of stayed with me in the idea behind what happened. And I think what worries me is that one of the things I love about the internet is the conjecture, the contentions, the arguments. Whether they stay friendly or not is another thing. But I love the idea that people have opinions. What I don't like is somebody's opinion coming at the expense of somebody else's. Well, I suppose in a way it's very similar to doxing almost, because you're affecting somebody's life beyond the internet. Now, ContraPoints, I'll explain what happened, but she has since come off Twitter. She went off, came back on, and then went off again. So I can only assume that it's to just give herself a break and perhaps get back some, sort of mental clarity. I don't know. She hasn't given any details as to why she came off, other than she felt mobbed. So I can't speak to her mental status. She is still producing videos, which is wonderful. But I have noticed they're still philosophical in nature, like hers are, beautifully shot, wonderfully scripted. So she's not jumped a beat in terms of that. She's not skipped a beat in that way. But I have noticed she's steered clear of videos recently regarding trans issues. So it was something that I wanted. I think it's going to be a continuing problem. So it's not like we're going to solve it in this sort of in this podcast. But it's just, if there's one thing, as atheists and as skeptics are all different, but if there's one thing that I find that we all agree on, for the most part, is the continuing conversation. The stagnation of conversation is one of the things that frightens me the most. I don't sometimes like hearing things. Sometimes things and opinions make me want to vomit, but I still don't feel the right to stop somebody, whether that's indirect. I don't know whether her life was threatened or anything like that. It may just be that she's come off Twitter and that's that. But it's I think a slippery slope a little bit, especially for somebody as big as her and as influential as her, to just suddenly then not be able to feel like she has a platform. And for all the people that will likely suffer for not perhaps, having that, viewing that outlet of hers, because her videos are obviously very opulent, very over the top, and very, very, very well done. But I think she used Twitter as a sort of a quicker way of sort of putting her opinions out there, and very personal, considering she was, an icon, I suppose, in so many ways. She still kept it very personal, and that's what I liked about her Twitter. But of course, for some reason, some people thought these opinions were far too damaging, and everybody piled on. So, yeah.
Because it was mostly her audience. I know that. So, how much of her audience really came down on her? Do you know, kind of what percentage? Or
I don't know the statistics. All I know is that, you'd have to go through, I suppose, the comment section. Right. And I did, and somewhat, and it was, you can tell these people, it was a reactionary thing. And I can't speak as to the issues that people who identify as non-binary or trans or anything like that. I can't speak to their life experience. I just can't. I can listen and I can perhaps have an opinion on it, but I can't. But it did seem sort of like, reactionary. And as there's perhaps some truth when you react to something, but you're rarely rational when you're angry or upset. And the problem is that there's not are you sure you want to send this tweet sort of button? Are you sure you want to make this comment sort of button? Have you calmed down a little bit sort of thing before people react? And of course, when it comes en masse, I think that's definitely an issue. But what I found strange was, not strange, rather wonderful actually, was a lot of other trans people who themselves have channels came out in defense of her. And seemed to see it for what it was, which was her just sharing an opinion, which is as valid as anybody else's, that didn't sort of pick on anybody, very specifically at least. She was just speaking from experience and speaking from her heart. And, they immediately jumped to her defense. And of course, sometimes, as we've seen recently with other issues, as soon as anybody in the trans community rushes to somebody's aid in this sort of sense, then they get sort of named thrown at them. You're the token this, you're the token that. If they're a person of color as well, they get a whole set of, horrible names and things like that. All these sort of labels are thrown at them, and it's such a shame because it's, again, I can understand having a reaction to something, but pushing it to the point where it stops conversation is just bizarre and damaging for everyone, whether or not they see it at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I see a few underlying factors. I can't see how this isn't just mostly going to turn into a conversation about free speech. But other than that part, I've seen, especially on YouTube and on Twitter, that no one gets fired up more than people whose main focus is identity politics. So whether it's a trans issue or another LGBTQ issue or something based in race, it tends to be like the hottest trigger you can push and most reactionary kind of conversations or put downs that you can get is when you touch on those hot button issues. And I don't want anyone thinking that I don't think those are important issues, because I absolutely do. So please don't think I'm trying to downgrade them. Excuse me, I still have a cold. You can't tell. But yeah, I feel like I've noticed really more than anything, you get the most reactionary comments when you're talking about any kind of identity politics. And as we've seen, again, recently in the past, with Rationality Rules, love or hate his video, that thing divided a community pretty thoroughly in half. And if you agreed to any standard, really, um, you were labeled, as Kelly was saying. You tend to get a label if you agree or disagree with one side or the other. You got the label slapped on you of transphobic. Excuse me. And even if we went by Stephen's original video, I don't think any of it was necessarily transphobic or made him a transphobe. I can see how some people would have taken it that way, but if you really take a step back for 3 seconds, you could see that the video is not meant to do any harm. And he did come out slowly and try to correct things, but that's not really the point. The main point is how people react, especially to hot topics like this. So what's your thought on just my observation here? Like, identity politics is really one of the most reactionary kind of.
Oh, definitely, and it's human nature to want to, especially if you're younger, I think, as well. Perhaps I'm older, so I don't give as much of a shit. Or I do, but I realise that getting bogged down in labels and things just is a massive waste of energy. But it feels good. It feels good to be able to self-identify as something and say, I am this, I stand for this, especially when you're on the internet. You don't have this conversational back and forth like you do with your friends or your family, where you're talking and you're debating. So I think you feel like you have to put across what your sort of causes are, if you have any, and every single community does have issues like this, because you're getting a congregation of people together who might have one combining factor that brings them all together, but then they are their individual people. So I think some people thought it perhaps was a good idea to identify as something, so that you sort of get an idea of where somebody's coming from. But the problem is, as soon as somebody just sort of slightly sway from what usually, like for example, a lot of atheists, at least in the US, tend to be more left-leaning, I found, just from my personal observation, whereas I probably am a bit more, keep going on about this, a bit more centrist, in the UK at least. So, I could perhaps, if I was an American atheist and I said something that was considered a little bit more to the right, people would be like, oh my gosh, and these are intelligent people as well. They're not trying to be dicks, I don't think. They are just, I think we just get an idea of how we see people. And the problem is that having an opinion isn't a bad thing. Stopping the conversation is the bad thing to me. And or not allowing somebody to at least express what they mean. Now, the things with obviously Stephen's video is that he spent obviously a lot of time putting effort into his video. I watched it. I thought it was very interesting. I had questions that actually Essence of Thought sort of answered, and the way he expressed things in his video. So there was the back and forth. But the difference is I watched both. I didn't just agree with Essence of Thought. I didn't just agree with Stephen. I watched them both, and they both enlightened me to certain facts that I could then go check for myself.
Agreed.
Exactly. What I didn't do is go, oh my God, I don't agree with this, even without checking, because I don't know the science behind all the sort of trans sports things. Gosh, it's I know he did a video with Lizzie Lang, and they went through all the details, and it just went over my head. So I'm not going to speak on it because I don't know enough.
Right.
But the same with ContraPoint. She made me feel empathy and understanding for the incel community. Now, I don't know how people are going to react to that in the chat, but what she did was she stepped back, she looked at the whole thing, looked at it in a philosophical sense, because she's, that's basically her thing, but also speaking from personal experience about online communities and stuff like that. So, if somebody's got the power to be able to express, whether or not you agree with it, but to be able to express something that it makes people think, and then you're partly responsible for why that person feels like they can't do that anymore, then you're part of the problem, I think. Yeah, so I think identity politics probably started out as a good thing, especially online, to be able to express who you are, say hi, and well, we do it in our bios, don't we? We sort of put down who we are in however many characters, and then it's not supposed to express everything about us, but it's a little bit like a business card, I suppose. But it can be quite damaging, I think.
No, absolutely can. And I mean, taking a stance on anything has the potential to put you in hot water. And I guess, and I'm not trying to like pick at essence of thought at all, but I feel like the rhetoric that they created after this video is exactly what I'm talking about. It's the reactionary and the cancel culture. Excuse me, that we're talking about, that they really personified during that last big dispute. So I would just like to kind of put that forth as an example, because I feel like it's a pretty good one of that. And it's the conversation that really matters, right? It doesn't matter if you're verbally beating porch atheists with a stick like nightmare fuel, or excuse me, I apologize. No. Or if you're just kind of like Forsaking Faith, who likes to do a podcast about like it's like a super friendly to a Christian kind of atheist podcast. I'm just talking about the differences and like the transition of becoming a Christian to an atheist, or anything in between. We still want to make those lines of communication, like leave those open, because you can look at it a few different ways. One being, well, you're not going to have anything to do if you cancel all your competition, right? Yeah. The other, if you care about meaningful conversations, you need to have someone on the opposing side or with a different opinion. And I do understand that there are some opinions that you may find incredibly disturbing, that you really want to shut down. And I think that's fine to a point. But still, everyone has that right to free speech, and we need to protect that for each other in order to keep that right equal for everyone. So I don't know. I guess, where would you like to take it from here? Would you like to take it on how do we keep this right of free speech equal for everyone? We're going to talk about ways how to talk to people and how to not talk to people, or what do you think is an interesting way to take this?
It's one of those things where, like, as much as I think when people say free speech, then you're letting people say anti-Semitic things and no, depending on where you are, there are laws specifically for certain hate speech, for anything that might put people in danger. And even online, you are not free to just be able to say anything you like without consequence. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be shouted down and told, say somebody's wrong, explain why they're wrong, but to almost do this sort of en masse mobbing, and it seems like it's getting more and more organized. That just may be how I'm sort of viewing it, but it seems like almost like it becomes a thing. Cancel, there's a hashtag, all these sort of things take place so quickly. What's that famous line with Winston Churchill? A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets a chance to put its trousers on, sort of thing. It's a similar sort of thing, because, and that's not to say that the original statement wasn't false or damaging in a sense. But that's the thing. It's eroding the, oh God, Jordan Peterson's ruined this word for me now, hierarchy of what we know to be unacceptable speech. You know, for the most part, for most people don't like racist speech. They don't like people ableist speech. They don't like, there's just variants of different types of speech that even people in different countries, you and I, if I were to say something negative about a person of color, you'd likely react, and yet we're on completely different sides of the planet. And it's just in us to know that there's these variants. The other thing is, to be able to sort of like, it's recognizing what is extreme and what is questionable. Let's have a conversation about it. And let's face it, if somebody is a bigot, if somebody has the ability to have a channel and say stuff that's their opinion, which they're allowed to, but say stuff that's just awful, just disgusting, racist, sexist, and sort of everything, do you really think that they're going to use sort of delicate language about it? They're not. They're the ones that sort of need to not cancel, but they're the ones that you just need to switch, dislike the video, go somewhere else. That's the power, is to just be able to say, I don't enjoy your stuff, bugger off. Then you do get people who say, yes, but they're still speaking to a subset of people. So, okay, then find those people and have a conversation with those people. But there will always be people who crop up with an opinion, but don't stop the conversation, because you're more likely to affect people through reasoned argument than you are just shoving each other to different sides of the wall. I say this and I think, am I being naive? But no, because I do think there'll come a point where literally everything is super offensive. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an overly well educated person. I'm not, I just see things, I think, reasonably. And yet somebody could come at me and say I'm transphobic, which to me just sounds like the most bonkers thing ever. But once you say it and once it gathers steam, it becomes, it's on the internet, so it's there forever.
Yeah.
So I can sit here and prove that I'm not, but it is that sort of like the juggernaut sort of action behind what's happening, and I think there's some people out there who will actually hold their hands up and say, oh, I said this in error, and most people, when you look at the comments of videos, will say, oh, I can see what you were getting at here, either thanks for apologizing, stuff like that. They're the people that need to be the loudest, the ones that say, you know what, I didn't agree with what you said, but now that you've explained it, like you would in real life almost, you'd have these conversations. That's just not what's happening. And if you could take down somebody who I find reasonable, like ContraPoints, if you could take her down, then that is definitely a big sign that things are going tits up, as we say.
Right, yeah. Well said. So we have a few comments here in the live chat. Oh. One is from Navardia, who's also been a guest on the show. She's amazing. She asked, Great Skeptic, I had a response to my video where I was expressing happiness over Stephen Anderson being banned from New Zealand, being wrong because I celebrated cancel culture. Where should we draw the line? And before I respond, American Patriot said, where do you draw the line at what is racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, etc.? Just don't allow calls for violence. And for that, I absolutely agree. That's where I personally draw the line, is when there's a call for violence, because that goes beyond free speech. I'm pretty close to a free speech absolutist, but I feel like in any issue you have to draw a line somewhere, and it can be kind of a faded line, if you will. But you do need to have some kind of resolve. You need to know where you're willing to fight to, and where you're gonna like live and let live. So excuse me. And as far as the Steven Anderson thing goes, that's a really interesting thing to bring up, because yeah, when it comes to Steven Anderson, or oh shoot, I can't remember his name, down in Florida, who's linked to Steven Anderson, I believe. Yeah, we do tend to shut down a lot of platforms for these religious fundamentalists to um, like, well, we just shut down their platforms. Like we cut off some of their funding online. And I would say that there is definitely a call to violence when we're talking about people like that and Matt Powell, right? Because they are actively saying that what they want is for the government to kill members of the LGBTQ community. And well, that, again, if I'm drawing my line and being logically consistent, I would have to say, well, even though they want to do it in a Tommy McMurtry, thank you, Nirvardia. That was the other name I was trying to think of, the Pumpkin King.
Oh God.
Or the Pumpkin Lover. But yes. No, we do need to draw the line somewhere. And I think calls to violence is definitely where I absolutely have to say, oh, you've hit a brick wall. I am the brick wall. Hello. And if you're involved in activism in any way, like environmental activism, or YouTube activism, let's say, you do want to keep that open conversation, right? Excuse me. But you also, when you are making a hobby or a career out of looking at these opposing views, you are going to come across some where you really need to ask yourself, well, do I want to bring this up? Do I want to give this a platform at all? Because if you're someone like Mr. Atheist or Rationality Rules, you need to be more careful of what you say when you have so many people listening to you. And if you platform the wrong person, you will get blamed for giving that person a platform. It's pretty plain and simple, and it just comes with the culture of intertwining with people on the internet. So I don't know. Go ahead.
So yeah, I'm so conscious of you resting your poor throat, so I'll just jab on, and when you feel like you can talk, just like put your hand up. Okay. So yeah, it's interesting that you bring up those individuals, because that's what I'm talking about. They are like the extreme. They are almost a parody of what a crazy religious person thinks. And of course, we know that it comes in variants, and that there's people who are, who may have the similar sort of thoughts, but don't, have a Facebook banner on their Facebook page saying kill all the gays and with a noose and all that sort of stuff. It couldn't be more obvious as to what they're wanting to express and what they're wanting to happen. And I think one of them even said about making it illegal to be able to lynch gay people. Fucking morons. But they are an obvious issue, and I think even dealing with them, you could say, oh, let's keep the conversation up with them. Those sorts of people, they have that idea, and they've built themselves up for that to be their sort of their calling card, as it were. When I talk about the conversations, I don't just mean with the people who, tout these ideas. I'm talking about all the people in the comments, and the sort of outliers, and the people who might just have their minds changed, who might think a certain way and follow someone because they have a powerful opinion. But if you have the right conversation, you might say, well, have you been able to think about it like this? And when you look at comment sections where people are actually having conversations, it's lovely. It's exactly what I want for my channel. I want people to be able to have conversations, and because I'm small, that does tend to happen quite, nicely. but it's when people have this absolutist idea of things, that's the problem. So to me, those guys are like the epitome of just ridiculousness. And although he's been banned from places, so you could consider that cancel culture, I suppose, but he still has a voice online. He can still get online and share his nonsense. But people like ContraPoints, and this wasn't even a video she created. She literally retweeted a tweet from another trans person and put a comment on it that spoke of her personal experience. Boom, all fucking hell broke loose. It wasn't a statement of fact. It wasn't a cutting critique of a particular subset of society. She literally said, "This is my experience," which is one of the reasons I follow her, to understand her experience. So her experience isn't valid, but everybody else's is. That's what I'm talking about, that sort of erosion of what's reasonable compared to what's obviously silly. And it can be hard to draw the line when it comes to racist slurs, because over time, depending on where you live in the world, there is still obviously bigotry of some kind, whether it's to do with race, sex, class system. I mean, Japan has a class system. Nobody seems to really talk about this, but they have a really strong class system from what I understand. And, people are treated literally as lesser humans. It's something that over time does get better. But like I said, if people really want to be bigoted, they're not going to be gentle about it. They're not going to, they might sort of seem reasonable. They might not be shouting at the camera, and they might seem reasonable, and that's how they get people. But they don't hide the fact that that's what they think. Even people like Stefan Molyneux, he's pretty open about it. He's a dickhead, but he's pretty open about it. He doesn't hide these ideas of his. And yet he somehow still manages to go on Twitter. So when you get somebody like ContraPoints, who's a reasonable person, who is an activist, you can't deny that she isn't. And then to say, no, well, you didn't say something quite the way we wanted you to say it, done. Now, she chose to come off Twitter. So I think people are going to say, technically, we didn't cancel her. But, I think people have got to take some sort of responsibility for it. But the reason I mentioned about over time is because when I was researching about this, I found the most amazing story in The New Yorker. And it was about a comedian. I wish I'd actually saved the thing. In the 1960s, I believe. Now, back then, in America at least, and I'm sure here too, but you had obscenity laws. And this particular comic used a lot of obscene language in his material. And it didn't state whether or not it was sexist or misogynist or racist, but given the time period, it's likely there's probably, bits and bobs in there of which is wrong, no matter the time frame. That's how I'm seeing it now. But swearing in and of itself isn't necessarily a horrible thing. Nobody really gets hurt by it. I mean, there's some words that make people cringe, but unless it's loaded with racist language and sexist language and stuff like that. So if I just say fuck, it's pretty ambiguous, isn't it? It's pretty open. It can mean lots of different things. But he kept being taken to court. He kept being arrested and he kept being taken to court. And he kept pushing because he said, "You're literally taking the words out of my mouth." And he did it so much that he became financially ruined and ended up, I think after his last, he did actually spend a little bit of time in prison for it, died of a morphine overdose, if I remember rightly, a couple of years after he served his last period. So it didn't end well. And it even states in the article that the prosecution and the legal sort of team involved did blame themselves, because although they were following the letter of the law, they did come out afterwards saying, he was right. It wasn't it was an aspect of taking somebody's free speech away. And it was such an interesting story, because then, as now, there were people, not only fans of his, but celebrity friends of his, who were sticking up for him, were putting their neck out. People like Elizabeth Taylor, real big names, were saying, this is ridiculous. He's a comic. This is, it's basically fiction. He's just trying to make people laugh. And yet, because he said certain words that were against the law, so he did break the law. That's obviously a bit different to what it is now. But if you switch those out for sort of hate speech is it's not only so much more incendiary, it's just stupid when you consider somebody lesser because of the color of their skin and things like that. Oh, have you got something to say?
Yes, I raised my hand for those who couldn't see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, two things real quick. One is Nacha asked in the chat, and I don't need to pull it up exactly. Or well, maybe let's just go ahead and do it. Okay. LEAH podcast. Nacha asked, is there a difference between what creates offense and what is a legal offense? And that's really, where you're speaking of. And I have a little saying, laws don't dictate morals. And I'll leave it there for a second because we have to take a break, actually. Because Zoom is telling us we're still on a timer. Yeah, so we have about a minute before it shuts down. So we are going to take about a 5-10 minute break tops, and we'll be back probably with a new link. So yeah, so there's that. So please watch out for the new link. Follow me at Gray Skeptic Mac on Twitter. I put the words down below. So follow us there, and we'll see you guys here in a few minutes.